Grace to you and peace from God, our Father and Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ, as we have gathered in the midst of his presence here this morning. You know, oftentimes we don't understand what one another is going through, and we often will say, well, I don't know how you feel, you don't know how I feel, and sometimes that's a bit awkward as we want to come alongside with empathy for each other, and we really don't walk exactly the same roads, and so then it's just down to being keen listeners to each other. But statistics have shown, as I like to point out from time to time, that one thing we share is that more than 95% of us were born of a mother. That is incredible when you think about it, because it really kind of is. Some of our journeys are going to be different than others. Hopefully that journey for you with whatever mother means to you is a significant one and a positive one. Maybe most likely there's some some mixture of things, mostly good, not always. There's some difficulties. That's a part of family life. Maybe, perhaps, unfortunately, there are significant kinds of negatives, whatever that might be for you. But it is the month of Mother's Day. And so that's next Sunday. It's a big deal. It drives so much of who we are. And yeah, I like to sort of, just ever so mildly poke fun, but I am serious, that, it feels like Mother's Day in our culture is here and Father's Day is here. It just feels that way to me. Maybe I'm being biased as a father and a male, but it feels like it doesn't get quite the same notoriety and affection. So I work hard to bring it up just a little bit each year. So next month is going to be about fathers and masculinity. This month, to the best of my ability, is about, in a sense, we all share in that we have mothers. Some of us are mothers. All women have that kind of sense, stereotypically to one degree or another, of that nurturing standpoint and this call that Paul makes for us today, that I'm actually going to ultimately say is kind of a feminine thing for him to do, stereotypically, is to call us to thankfulness. In my own journey, I do lift up my parents from time to time, and recently even have talked about my mother, who had some difficulties in life. Most of them really dealt with that she was untimely born, in my opinion. She was a person that had just oodles of energy and excitement for life. She had dreams. And when she was born, which was 1916, that wasn't a time when women had a lot of opportunities, and so a lot of her dreams went by the wayside. But she was the keen person for me from a spiritual standpoint. I've talked from time to time about how every Saturday night, yes, my dad watched the infamous Lawrence Welk and Hee-Haw on television, while I and my mother talked Jesus and memorized commandments or whatever. That's what we did. We had these incredible conversations, not unlike our beloved little Chester now, if you ever get a chance to know Chester. Chester's the first person that I've ever met that reminded me of me, that tormented adults with big-time Christian questions. That's who I was as a kid. Okay? And my mother was willing to walk there with me. That was pretty cool. And no one ever supported me more than her. I mean, probably this wasn't always accurate, but I think everyone needs at least one person in their life that says, by and large, you're always right, and I am always there for you, and I don't care what the principal said. I don't know, My son is right. I don't know. It was great. A part of that, one of my very best memories of my mother is, it was a simpler time. I had just the most fun experience this past week that I just for some reason feel I need to include. So I'm going to Columbia this week and going across the infamous bridge, right? And for we all know what it is to go across that bridge. And I will remind you that immediately across the bridge, the speed limit is 60 miles per hour. It is not 70 for like another half a mile. But some of you seem to disregard that and go zooming past me. Well, I always think it's good to keep my eye on the rearview mirror, and lo and behold, I'm aware that there's a law enforcement person right behind me. So I am absolutely not going over 60 miles an hour. I am even driving 10 and 2. I am focused. Next thing I know, he goes, vroom, past me on the left. And I go, hey. He didn't hear me, I don't think. And it's not smart to honk at the law enforcement, I don't think. So I didn't do that. And so he's going at least 70 miles an hour, and I go, man. And all of a sudden, he stomps on his brake. And I go, there's no cars around him. What's he doing? And then I see in the median, there's another trooper waiting for speeders. And I go, would a trooper pull over a trooper? Oh, that would have been awesome. I don't know, license and registration. I don't know. That would have been awesome. But perhaps you are like me in this regard, that even if you're going the speed limit, if you come upon someone who is looking at your speed limit, your speeding, your amount of whatever speed you're going, and has the opportunity to give you a ticket and cost you money, you stomp on the brake. You just instinctively do. And I go, well, I guess it even worked out that way for the trooper. I just found that just absolutely delightful. Well, I come as a child from a simpler time. I can't remember a cop ever pulling anyone over back when I was a kid. I can't remember I ever saw it. Yeah, theoretically, they had signs up that said speed limit 65 on most roads where I was. But my mother and I, when we would do serious shopping, we would go to a town that was 30 miles away. And, we would crank those windows down back before those little silly buttons that make the window go up and down. These are real windows, and that silly air conditioning. Yeah, I can even remember when, in 1963, we put seat belts in the car that my parents had just purchased because it didn't come with them. Those were the days. And so we roll the windows down. My mother pushes the accelerator down to the floor, and in the 1960s, there was none of that pollution stuff, 400 horsepower, spin the wheels whether you want to or not, and away we would go, 80 miles an hour perhaps, because cars weren't made real well in comparison to today. At 80 miles an hour, those cars are like shimmying. It feels really fast. It was awesome. And away we go. That was freedom for my mother, a freedom that was often lost on her otherwise, because those dreams were somehow impeded. And it's in that way, as difficult as it understandably might be for people around me, but when I drive my Mustang today, that is in honor of my mother. That is my connection to her. It is, in a sense, fulfilling a dream that she could never have. So we've all had mothers. What is that like to you? What does your mother mean to you? I mean, I was reading, I don't know, I suppose it was Google, some app or something, about a week or so ago, that researchers have even shown that a mother's voice gives rise to oxytocin in a child. It's a chemical reaction that happens. And I go, as a dad, no, Grandpa, that's not fair. There's nothing cooler, as I was even mentioning just before. Had the opportunity to have my granddaughter in my house Friday night. The feeling of a child snuggling up on your shoulder and nuzzling into your neck, Well, that's as good as it gets. Well, life has changed a lot in the years. Even in my little old life, the roles of women have changed a lot. Women are actually perceived as almost human now. That's huge. And women even have the opportunity, for the most part, to do whatever kind of job they might like to do. So those are big steps. And sometimes we'll kind of talk about this, I am sure, a month from now, about the role of men and how men need to step it up a notch. But certainly, when you're a father now, because the roles of women have expanded, that the role of father in, if you will, even nurturing their own child has become more significant. And sometimes that's even difficult for the women to allow. Because yes, their lives are huge and busy in all sorts of other places, but there still is that connection to a child that's very special. And yeah, that's why when I experience it, there's nothing like it. And so we like having that. And so there needs to be now some give and take as we allow roles to change and to emerge and to grow into different kinds of ways. So it is the month of Mother's Day, and I always say, and I imagine I will say in future weeks, because there are going to be people that aren't there today, they're going to be there next week. I have significant sensitivity, particularly in the month of Mother's Day, because we do make such a big thing of it, that not everyone gets to be a mother. Sometimes, heaven forbid, one's child dies. There are all sorts of differing kinds of realities that enter in, and it can feel very much alone and depressing if whatever your dream of mother was never quite turned out to be. So that's why I am very clear, I am very defined in saying that we are looking at these roles that are very much stereotypically female. You don't have to be a mother to be mothering. You know? I don't know if you had a mother like I had in many respects, as much as I absolutely appreciate and adore her. There was that kind of discipline that she offered that I think only mothers can provide. That if I was doing anything that wasn't really what she wanted me to do, she just took one eye at me and I complied. Just like that. That is the power of a mother. Maybe it's because I like that oxytocin and I wanted to get more. I don't know. Maybe it's all about drugs. So whoever you are, including males, because all males have some feminine aspects and all females have some masculine aspects. And so whatever it is, wherever you kind of fall on that spectrum, we can learn from one another about a nurturing, mothering kind of input that, in the sense of who Paul is today, to bring us to lives of thankfulness. Because in my childhood, we didn't have much money. We were pretty dysfunctional. We had 2 television stations. We had gone about as far as you can go. Now, I got 100 stations. The most fit thing on my body is my thumb, because I can really do that remote well. I can go all through 100 really fast. And sometimes we all understand this. You get to the end of 100 and you go, I still didn't find anything that I really want to watch. And you go, what? It's hard to find those reruns of Lawrence Welk and Hee Haw today. The good old days. Well, you might think for Paul that being in prison, that would be a negative thing. And I'm sure he really would have rather to not be there, but that's where he was because of his faith. And if it was because of his faith that he was going to end up in prison, well, so be it. And it's an interesting thing, again, in the context always of thinking about that maybe in the context of something that isn't so pleasant, maybe God is going to do something that's even more significant than I can figure out at the moment. Because Paul starts these churches all over the world as it was at that time, and he has this mothering way about him. It is that way of a mother who just has that look. Because these churches, they're filled with people, you know. And people act out, even if it's church, sometimes especially in church. And so it was from the very beginning. They fought with each other about who was really the leader. They fought about who would do what as far as roles. They fought about who should be involved, who was welcome. They fought about, to what degree should we pay any attention to the poor. They just did these kinds of things. And Paul is very upset, often with these churches, in greater and lesser extents, depending on which church it is. And so, if he hadn't been in prison, he would have always just journeyed to these locations. And that would have been an oral discourse, communication, and it would have been lost on us. But because he's in prison, his only recourse was to write. And we still have these letters today. They comprise what we call the Bible. They are the norm for our living out and kind of coming alongside of our contemporary experience to say, what does that mean for us? These letters still have impact for us. And so it's always very exciting. That's why, clergy often start out with grace to you and peace from God our Father and Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Well, that comes from Paul. That's how he always started out his letters. And then he would follow it up by what you heard too, the lovely part about, I always thank God every time I remember you in prayer. And then from there, then he would kind of go on, but you've been acting very badly and I want you to shape up. All right. For me, that's just very much a mothering kind of thing. And not the least of which to say, I don't care what your experience of life is. Look at mine. I'm in prison. I got whatever, again, that thorn in the flesh is that messes with my life. I've been shipwrecked. And yeah, probably someday I'm going to die for my faith. And I'm tortured. All these kinds of things. And I thank God every day. And that's a piece that we can learn from in our own time. Now, Paul, it seemed, had something of a conflicted reality with women. I still like to have fun and say that I'm absolutely convinced he got left at the altar by some woman, that she went off and married Peter or something like that, because there are things that he says from time to time that just seem angry or hurt. And you have to put it within the context of his culture, whether we like to or not. These are unpleasant kinds of things to think about, really, in that day, women really were effectively property. It was their job to be baby bearers, no more, no less. And that's why, heaven forbid, if a woman was not able to bear a child, even if by our contemporary scientific standards, we might know that it could just as easily be the male's problem, it was the woman's fault, and she just never was able to find a place in society as a result. So, into that, there have been people that have tried to claim that, well, Paul, for his time, was fairly progressive. And so, you can make a case that he comes across a bit defensively. Like, hey, Paul, you've been allowing too much with women here. And he goes, well, okay, I don't allow women to do anything in church. All right, so be quiet. There is that part. And still to this day, to greater and lesser extents across the Christian community, we're not necessarily of one mind exactly of what the role of women is, particularly in church. Okay. Because at the same time, and this is what's vital to recognize and why there has been a lot of change on that issue across denominational realms, in that Paul often referenced women who led other ministries, and he did so in a very positive way. He spoke of them in a way that looked like a partnership. So there is this role of women that even in the likes of Paul are welling up and finding a way forward. And it's a kind of, again, an opportunity for us to think, well, what does that mean for us? What does that look like for us? We live in a culture where the youngest amongst us seem to often struggle these days in ways it seems that we haven't in prior generations. For me, that's a big deal. And I look to how stressed out we are as people these days, that our lives are filled with so much stuff, and it might be really good things that we really don't have time to focus in on. We don't really have time maybe to do some things that God would have us focus on, to do those really well. And yeah, you know, I almost feel badly, but not badly enough, I guess, that I will often say that for me the worst four-letter word is busy. That I don't ever want to hear people say that their lives are busy, because at least that says to me that we don't have time to really step back. We don't have time to pray. We don't have time to evaluate. We don't have time that if something really important comes along, to say, well, I'm going to focus on that. You know, the new cell phone, whatever, comes out, and there is like this incredible pressure in our culture somehow that you got to go get it. It doesn't matter that the one in my pocket works just fine currently. This one has a new app or something. It's a little faster. I don't know. I just have to have it. I'm going to go stand in line for 7 hours so that I can pay $700 and get a new phone. Then my life will be complete. I don't know. What is that? You know, if you really want a new phone, you want to pay $700, that's cool. It's more about what that is in our culture that seems to drive us in that regard, regardless if it's a cell phone or whatever it might be, to find our identity, to find our joy, to find our thankfulness out of stuff. Because it really points to, again, I'm going to say, okay, because we're busy and we're stressed out. And so that's what I'm going to say it is for our children. And we blame everybody. We blame parents. We blame teachers. We blame celebrities. We just go down and down, trying to put the blame on somebody other than myself. And you look at people like Paul, who said there really isn't anything other than Christ and Him crucified. No more, no less. This is what it is. And you are the body of Christ. You are that body, living, breathing, loving one another, being loved by God. That is reason to be thankful. And it doesn't matter if you're in jail. It doesn't matter if you're poor. It doesn't matter if your health is a mess. You are loved by the eternal God, and you have people around you who are loved by that God and love you in His behalf. So, that for me is a feminine type of expression. It's a feminine way of looking at the reality of the world. You know, I see it, you know, all the time, okay. How many Cardinal fans? Oh, your Yachty. Not a good night. The man is hurt. in the way that only a man can be hurt. There. And, but no way was he going to get carried off the field. No way. He's going to walk off no matter how much he's in pain. Because he's a man. That's what we got to do. So that's why I'm saying, to be thankful for what we have, to be thankful for the people around us, that's kind of a feminine thing. And so it doesn't matter if you have ever physically been a mother or not, that kind of nurturing thing, that opportunity to give rise to oxytocin for the rest of us, evidently, is there to give us hope and love. That's what you have to offer. And so we cling to that person of Paul in his sort of mothering way, who said, you people in Philippi, you should just be thankful. All of this stuff is just stuff in the world. Don't get lost in all of that. Recognize that you're loved by God and that you have loving people around you. That's what it is to be church, to be loved and to love. So in your week ahead, what's that going to look like for you? There are going to be all sorts of opportunities when you will have choices to be made. All sorts of things that aren't going to go right, whether it's at school, at work, what have you, infamous family, all sorts of reasons when you can just sort of throw up your hands and say, forget it. And maybe even choose poorly for the ways in which you might self-medicate one way or another. Or you can say, I'm a loved child of God, and I have the opportunity to love people in his name. And I'm going to be thankful for that, because I don't need any more.